Okay, good. Welcome to the Bucky Weekend Call. This is April 27th or 28th, depending on what continent you're on. And we are getting very close to the end of the Buckminster Fuller book here. Um, and we're on page 323. And actually, I think the last page of the book before the appendices is 346. So we may not get to the end today if we take time to discuss like we've done, although there are a lot of pictures in these pages. So we'll just see how far we get. We may be finishing it off today. Who knows? And then we get to decide what we're going to do next. We could do the appendices in the book. And we've also got a couple of other books in mind that have been come up for topics, and we can talk about that at the time. So, Anne, how are you feeling today? And what is your expectation for today's call?
Okay, I was happy to be able to catch up some with you and Richard. So because we talk about Bucky, but we really don't know much about. I don't know much about all of you as to what you have done and achieved in the past and things, and just basically life, right? And so I was very happy to do that and to get to know all in our team as our group much better as we go along. I'm really looking forward to that. And already as it stands, getting to know Steve, getting to know Richard, both of you through Bucky, every time we discuss Bucky, I mean, these are the deepest thoughts, on issues in the world and just life in general. I'm forever grateful for that, and it's a very different sort of friendship here. So yes, so looking forward to finishing this book as well and moving on to the next one. And it's been amazing. Thank you for doing Critical Path. I mean, it's set me on quite a different path as well as to, I mean, maybe not different, but you know how you do trajectories, right? So you go and then you shift, right? You shift. But the thing is, the shift may look very slight, but when you move forward, the angle just, it just goes wide and wide, and it shifts further, right? That is what's been happening for me, and to be able to speak about things with greater clarity and conviction, I think that was really powerful for me. So I'm looking forward to more of this. Okay, so Richard, how do you feel, and what do you expect to get today?
Well, I feel pretty good, and I got a head start this morning with our trim tab group because uh, some of the discussion ended up referring to the um, Old Man River project in St. Louis that we discussed last week, and the person who was talking about is D.W. Jacobs. And D.W. Jacobs is the playwright that did a one-man play several years ago on Bucky, and it was Bucky's story of his life through the playwright scripting and everything. And he actually was the actor as well at one point. And right now he's on his way back to St. Louis because I forget exactly how it works, but it's sort of like a niece and her husband are playwrights as well, and they're doing another Bucky one-man sort of show, and so he's going back to help with that and so forth. So he was talking about the fact that in St. Louis there's something called a climatron, and connected to the climatron there are like city tours that take you out to there's a big uh, uh, storehouse kind of dome that was built. I'm blocking on the name of the company now that did it, but there's one version still there. There's in a sense the site of the Old Man River project, and then there's a short distance away Carbondale and one of Fuller's geodesic home. So I was getting some insight on what happened to the project, and um, when we were reading last week, of course, and the other thing is that one of the other fellows said, look, if you want to really know the details of that project, you'll find it in Critical Path. And so they were talking about all the things that we were reading and talking about last week. And the thinking really is that one of the reasons why it didn't go forward, some of it was kind of political, but some of it had to do with sort of like the banking system shutting down this idea that you could actually end up with, if you want, free housing and housing for those who needed affordable housing, etc. And so the conjecture is that it sort of got shut down. It's still, if you want, sitting out there for somebody to pick up on that kind of what they were calling the stadium approach to suburban living or city living. And as soon as they said stadium, of course, the image that we just saw now, popped right back into my head. So now the other thing that is kind of interesting is that you were mentioned, getting to know each other, which I think is really important. In our Trim Tab group several months ago now, we talked about Bucky Fuller's chronophile and how he kept almost a diary of everything. And so I think I put the idea forward that maybe we could do a chronophile of ourselves against some of his sort of significant dates. And so I started doing it, and I have done it to quite an extensive account now. And for example, my students over the years who wrote about the Bucky's thinking and how I was trying to use it in my student teaching, and I have many of their papers. So if they wrote a paper in 1989, I would find, well, let's say, go back further, say 1983, I would match that with something that Fuller did or something that was done about Fuller. And then I would take a quote or an excerpt from their paper and say, this is what this student had to say about sort of Bucky's thinking at that time. And so I have many pages now that take me all the way back to my parents' birth time, his birth time, even some overlaps between what Bucky was doing in the 1920s and say what my father was doing as a young man. Wow. So it's a fun project in that sense. And it also is useful because it does in fact give you a chance to chronicle some of your own life history in a way that could be interesting at some point for somebody to read to find out, well, what the heck did that guy actually do over X number of years? And there it is, and it compares with somebody else in their time frame. But anyway, so that's some of the things that for me have been very gratefully received, getting a chance to be in these kinds of conversations and the Trim Tab group and that sort of thing. As I've often said, that recently anyway, that I didn't have any of this kind of discussion, sort of dialogue with contemporaries when I was at the heart of my teaching. I was always considered, if you want, a maverick, which I guess that in some senses had me identified with Bucky anyway, because he was considered a maverick. So at least I could say I wasn't the only one. And that's the other kind of thing that's kind of interesting for us is that there's a certain kind of maverickness in all of us that are on these kinds of discussions, and we've expressed that and behaved that kind of maverickness in our own unique ways, and that's why for Anne, for me, relating to Anne. And what you're doing in the educational system is really quite exciting and inspirational. And and it's fun to sort of see you, in a sense, what some people would say is kicking ass to the establishment.
I like that.
Yeah.
I've got lots of questions for you. Anyway, carry on first. And
Yeah, that's, well, I'm complete, and turn it over to Steve in terms of
Oh.
your expectations.
Go ahead and get some feedback from Ann. Ann, what's your question for Richard?
Oh yeah, I'd like to know. You must have tons of papers from your students, all these years on having introduced them to Bucky. I would love to know, like, what has been like. How many years have you been doing this with your students? And I mean the immensity of the numbers. One, number two is what came out with some of their papers, how they are doing with having Bucky and his philosophy implanted as a DNA all those years back. I'm sure you've got tons of those stories.
Yeah, and some of them are kind of fun because in writing their papers, the students started off with, I didn't have the slightest idea what this professor was talking about, and in fact, I was quite annoyed with what he was doing, and then I decided to sort of dig into it, and one student I always remember. In her honesty, she's saying, I hated it. I hated what this guy was all about, like not me particularly, but say Fuller. And her closing sentence on her paper was, over the course of the term, my nemesis turned into my ally. uh, and so it was fun having things like that. And I also had a student where, again, we're at the end of the term. Everybody's writing their papers, and under the stress of an academic term, making deadlines and so forth. And so this young woman was, again, she was fed up to the eyeballs with what we were talking about with tetrahedrons and all that kind of stuff. So she went home to another city to visit her sister over the Christmas holidays. And so she was griping about the professor and the stress of the term and all that kind of stuff. And so her sister said, look, no, don't worry. We're going to go into some occupational therapy this afternoon. We're going to go down to the local church, and you're just going to work with your hands and just forget about all this academic stuff. So off they went. And, unbeknownst to this woman and her sister, what they were doing was making tetrahedral pincushions like tree hangings. So that's what she was doing all afternoon, is making tetrahedrons. And she brought two of them back. And in January, when the classes restarted, she walked into my office and she had these two, and she just actually threw them like a baseball pitcher and said, "You will not believe what happened to me." And I still have one of those cushions. That there's a number of stories like that where students had this big transformation from hating what was being discussed to finding it and finding it a bit like one of those diagrams that we were looking at, but with getting the imagery, the tetrahedron, if you want, kind of imagery, fixated into their head. And they would often come back and say, I couldn't get it out of my head, even if I tried. It kept coming back. One of the other things is that, how if you ask somebody, what you did in university and what courses you took, and do you remember your professors or the books that you used, many people say, I have no recall at all. And my experience has been, when I talk to students about what they remember and whatnot, they have the same kind of reaction. But the one thing they do remember, and they all say it, he said, I remember that tetrahedron. And, and so I have no idea whether they use it in any kind of practical way, but it it embedded in their head. So I think Bucky would love that kind of transformation story coming out from people who have read his work or studied his work. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Do they also tell you what they've taken it on to, as they in their careers, in their life and things like that?
Yeah, some of them do, and some of them they've actually stated in the crisis work. One that was not that didn't really have something to do with, well, maybe it did because we were teaching it, but anyway, we were working with homeless population, and we had to work with people living in a homeless kind of residence or shelter, and I had 9 students, and 8 of them were young women, and one was a man who had come back after some other kind of career in his work. But 2 of the young women were absolutely petrified to go onto the shelter main floor and speak to these people and so forth. But she came out of that so inspired by the opportunity to do the work that we were doing, that she went on to do her master's graduate school studies and stayed working in the field for quite a long time. So that,
Oh.
that was really a nice feeling to see that sort of thing happen.
Thank you. Yep.
Cool. Okay, so you handed it off to me, and you're complete now. I'm so grateful for your sharing. I just really think it is quite amazing. I mean, the way I think we're kind of like, I'm honored to say this actually, that I kind of have my spirit brothers and sisters here on this phone call. And because, a lot of times you meet people in business and you go through and you really don't have anything in common and relationships don't develop, but somehow we're here and we all have this sensibility about the universe, and somehow it brings us together in amazing ways. And I'm resonating with a couple things. One, here's one of my favorite things to tell. My stepdad was head of General Dynamics Astronautics. He developed the Atlas missile back in the 60s. He was head of ground support for the Atlas missile. Back there on the back of an Atlas missile up there, that gray thing sticking up right there is an Atlas missile. And prior to that, he worked at Northrop Aircraft, which had developed the Flying Wing, and that's a Snark missile. But he taught me this, and he developed the landing gear on the nose of the stealth of the Flying Wing, and that same design basically is being used in the stealth bombers today because they're all and they don't have a big long fuselage. But he taught me this idea of successive reapproximation about these little angles, that it's really necessary, no matter how on course you think you are, after you get out there certain ways, you need to adjust your angle by even a half a degree. And over a period of time, it makes a big difference in where you're going to land.
Wow.
And so it's very important to successively reapproximate where you are and where you're going. And that refers right to your angles that you talked about, Anne.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that you have that you were talking about. And then and I'm thinking about the nature of humanity. There's a guy named Robert Sapolsky. He's a professor at Stanford, I think, and he lived with bonobos for like 20 years. And he wrote a couple books. This one's called Monkey Love, Monkey Love, and other essays on our lives as animals. And here's a primate's memoir. His big thing now, he's gone out on a limb. His latest book is called Determined, and he's absolutely convinced that there is no free will, that people are the product of where they were born, what happened when they were in the womb, what happened in the first 3 months to 18 months of their infant and their first 6 years. And that, yeah, we make decisions in certain parameters, but his argument is the world would be a better place if we realized there is no free will, that people are the product of their environment. And what you guys as teachers have been teaching and are teaching to change the brain. You're actually changing the brains of the people that you're dealing with and making a difference. And he says, you know, he takes a look at crime. He takes a look. He said he has statistics that show that if you're going before a judge, you want to go after lunch, because statistically, after lunch, judges have their penalties are less. He can chart it out just because they had lunch. And of course, the judge is saying, I'm objective. I've looked at the facts. I'm just, but if the judges had lunch, they're not even aware that they're changing their paradigm. And I think that you guys are big paradigm shifters. You're big paradigm changers. And I think it's so cool. And to have Bucky be here and to think that this Old Man River project could be a model for maybe solving homeless issues today.
Yeah.
That's something. We're doing a freeway project. I've mentioned on this call, if the state goes ahead with this plan, they're going to displace several hundred, if not thousand, low-income housing people, and is going to pay them market value for their house. The trouble is they can't go anywhere else and buy a house of equal size at that price because it's the lowest price area in the country, in our state, in our county. And there seems to be no concept of fairness about it.
Yeah.
And so I'm really honored and grateful to be here with you folks. I learned a lot, and I'm happy that you guys listen to what I share every once in a while, and what a privilege it is to be here. It sounds like the end of the call, doesn't it? It's just the beginning. It's just the
Well, it's really interesting about the free will, because it really does come back to this whole idea of coexistence, or what I'm now calling co-determination as the replacement for self-determination. This idea that we're independent and free and can make up our own minds is just, just not correct. And so the sooner we give that belief up, the better off probably all of us will be in terms of the interdependence and interconnection. And yeah,
we're just interconnected. And this call is a perfect example of it. If people, I know I'm writing this book on meditation, and one of the things I've discovered is that I can show somebody a meditation, and within a day or two, they feel better. And they go, oh, I feel better now. I don't need to meditate anymore. And 3 months later, they spiral down. It takes more energy to come out of it then than it did if they just kept the momentum going. But we're just crazy people, aren't we? Human beings are crazy people.
Yeah. Something to share as well, because since more than 10 years ago, we got this American trainer who trains. He trains all over the world in one of the biggest youth training companies called Seeds Training out of California. Yeah. Oh, they're based in San Diego. I visited them before. So we used his programs until just before COVID. And since COVID, we haven't reactivated the thing, but we're in talks. So, okay, the point is this, right from the get-go, one of his earliest trainings for level one, whether it's teachers or students, is the whole idea of the brain, right? And the size of the brain, and the fact that it doesn't differ from someone who's a genius versus one who's normal, right? So the only difference is like the 15% connectivity between the right brain and the left brain. So that was what we learned from the early days. And it was very easy for us to talk to our kids, because you can build the connectivity. You can create the connectivity yourselves by doing things you don't normally do. You change out the way, even from the way you hold your knife and your fork, and you switch it over the hands, it changes. And the beauty is the brain, how the right and left brain works, right? So every time your hand or your limbs cross, like, okay, when my arm is here, or hand is here, the left brain, this right hand and left brain is in control. The minute it goes past the middle point, the left brain takes over. So the more things you do that moves your arms like this, like dancing and drumming and piano playing and games like golf and badminton and all that, they're really good at creating this connectivities, you know. So that got one. And I've seen when I learned about that, I've seen kids when they do creative stuff in my classes, I've seen kids who came in and you can see the eyes are rather dull. And in a couple of years, you can see it brightens up and the way they think, the way they write changes. So that really connected for me. And I also have a neuroscientist in our school. He has his PhD degree and everything from University of Toronto, right? So he was the one who told us that I'm sharing. I'm not sure if I'm sure you're familiar with the things I'm talking about, right? And yeah, and the best thing is that the fact that our brain cells, you know, people say our brain cells die and after a certain age and it doesn't get replaced. This is not true.
Not true.
Yeah, it's not true. So I was like, wow, I'm just sharing what we got, and therefore these are things that we made sure our kids knew as well, not buy into some of those strange ideas in the science textbooks that are just so outdated. Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So I will check out on this guy Robert Sapolsky, yeah, and
Okay.
have a look. Yeah.
There's some really good videos on him lately. He's on a campaign for this whole idea of free will. And if we would just figure out that there is no free will, we change all of our penal system, our judicial system, we change our educational system, we just change everything. Because if somebody's not performing to expectation, 90% of it is environmental and genetic. You know, he puts a lot on environment. It's what happens in the womb and things like that. And I love your idea. Are you complete, Anne?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And I love your idea, Richard, about the chronophile. And this idea, you know, what was Bucky doing on this date? What was I doing on this date? And then to think, why wasn't I in touch with that vibration at that time? What was I doing that was so important that didn't connect me with this greater purpose, you know, with this idea of humanity as one being. Now, I'm big on that whole thing, but to take a look chronologically and see exactly what I was doing when this event was happening, going, where was I? You know, why wasn't I in the mix of it? Or what was I doing and how did I add by being where I was? Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, what a powerful idea that is. The
Yeah.
last part of the book is just a giant chronophile appendix. It's just a list of things.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a reason to go through that and say, so everybody on the call can say, here's what I was doing in 1947. Here's what I was doing in 1986, right? Cool. I think we'll do that. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, I'd be glad to share what I've written too. So
Yeah, to add to it. That'd be really cool.
just to give you an idea of how I went about doing it and followed whatever timelines that I had or chrono lines that I had about Fuller's life, both before he died and afterwards.
Yeah. It would be fun to, if each of you go through your thing and show us what your students did, and each of us contributed and said, well, here's what I was doing and here's what we did. And that might inspire us all to take a look more at exactly how am I in my universe instead of just being in my own little, doing my own thing, you know?
Well, just to give you an example, I was in Montreal from 1963 to 5. So I watched in real time the effort to build the island in the St. Lawrence River that was going to end up being the Expo 67 island. And it was just dump truck after dump truck bringing rocks down into the river and dumping them, and they just disappeared. Like the idea that there's going to be an island surface here is, just nutso. And then eventually it did.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is that I was being taught systems, and I was starting to become critical of people's explanations of systems, because all I could get out of my instructors and everything was a system is a set of interacting parts. And when I started to ask them, well, how many do you need? How many parts do you need to make a system? They couldn't answer it. And yet in 1967, I was living in Ottawa, so we were next door to Montreal and traveled to the expo site several times. I saw the big dome, never heard of this guy Fuller. Didn't pay much attention to what the dome was all about, other than that it was the focal point for many people on the island, and and it was I didn't get connected to him and his work for another 10 years in the 70s when those synergetic books came out. And that's when I got my first tangible answer. How many parts does it take to make a whole? And Fuller, first thing I read was Fuller said it's 4. And at that point, it didn't matter to me whether he was right or he's wrong. He was definitive. He told me it's 4. And then he went on and, of course, explained why he thought 4 was the nature's coordinating system and that sort of thing. Yeah, so it's interesting exactly what you were saying, Steve, as to what you were doing. Why weren't you aware of that? And the other thing that's interesting about the expo is that two of the people who were involved in discovering the buckyball and carbon-60, two of them, the professor from Houston, from Rice University, and the professor from England, both of them went to Expo 67 at different times during the expo. And of course, at that point, neither one of them had any idea that 18 years down the road that they were going to be working together and they were going to find the third form of carbon and they were going to name it the Buckminster fullerene. Yeah, so it's and maybe I rubbed shoulders with them too, since I might have been on the ground same time one of them was.
Well, I hate to be too distracting. There is a theory among esoteric, certain esoteric groups that actually the human consciousness is moving backwards in time. That what human beings are doing is discovering how things became the way they are.
Mm.
And if and if you study like Excalibur, you study hermetics and you study alchemy, King Arthur was tutored by the wizard. Oh crap, I can't even remember his name right now. Who tutored King Arthur? It was the wizard. It's on the tip of my tongue. Merlin the magician. And Merlin was actually was moving backwards in time, and he knew this. And so he looked over, if you remember the cartoon with Disney, he looks over at Arthur, he says, "Be careful of that cup." And Arthur goes, "What cup?" And he turns over and knocks the cup off of the plate. I mean, because he saw it as already broken and he was seeing it being reconstructed. I don't know. We don't understand what's going on. I'm sorry to distract so much, but yeah, you people are patient people, so we're on our way. Are we ready to tackle the book?
Yeah.
All right. There's Sapolsky. I will, in fact, throw this link into the chat. And let's go to the book. And then we're going to start here. This is where we're starting. We're starting on page, I think I announced it. If you have a book in your hand, we're starting on page 323.
Yep.
In 1951.
Yep.
Okay, so whoops, there we go. So does someone want to read? I can start out. I'll start out reading and then we'll pass it along. I'll read a couple paragraphs because I didn't get to read much last time. In 1951 at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, I designed an automated cotton mill. Situated among the banks of many New England rivers and employing the latter's water power, all the great cotton mills of the 19th century USA were built 4 stories high. They used giant pulley wheels mounted on hubs of their great main water wheels to drive leather belts, which led slantingly upward into the mill's top floors and thence to the ceiling hung, pulley-driven, shafting mounted under these ceilings of each of the mill's 4 floors. It's so hard to understand what he says here, but you were getting that they were using water power to run pulleys to get things up and down 4 floors. There were many pairs of pulleys. Their axles hung in parallel. Each driving wheel had its own idler wheel. When the belts were shifted over from the idler to the driving wheel, they drove the wheels of their respective machines of the various types of cotton mill machinery, which was positioned just below the ceiling hung shafts. To operate these early in the 19th century mills, the owners imported whole town-sized armies of immigrants who struggled into the company's houses. Having no other sources available, the mill workers bought all their supplies from company stores. Their wages were minimal. After one half a century, the organized labor movement forced wage increases for them. In the early 20th centuries, the cotton manufacturing businesses owners abandoned their New England mills and moved their machinery into southern states, where homes needed to be heated and where they needed not be heated, where homes need not be heated, and where they could reach a low-cost labor market. Instead of belting overhead shafting and pulleys, they used World War I developed electric motor drives for each separate machine. The freedom from a shafting and water-driven system economizedly, which is not always the most economically, called for single-story factories with large roof areas. The latter's black tar and gravel roofs impounded vast quantities of sun heat, which in turn produced many internal environmental control problems. Before that southward cotton milling migration, my earliest job before World War I had been an apprentice cotton machine fitter, period. The new mill we were equipping with machinery was located in Sherbrooke, Quebec. Most of the machinery was manufactured in Lancashire, England, some in France. Working first as a helper to the Lancashire master machine fitters, I learned how to put together by myself every one of the various kinds of cotton mill machines. These began with cotton bale openers at a railroad track level and the blowing of the cotton to the top, fourth floor of the mill, which after the cotton went through the pickers, combers, cards, and slubbers, all of which gradually cleaned and formed the cotton into a continuous single strand of cotton, which strands then ran through the twisters into the thread spinning machines and thereafter into cotton cloth weaving machines. Eventually, together with other fitters, I taught the cotton mill workers how to operate their machines. It was a powerful and valuable experience. It was synergetic, behavior of a whole system unpredicted by the behavior of any one of its parts, only separately considered. Now, that's a profound sentence right there. The fact that all these machines and the fact that they actually produced a cotton thread, something more than the individual parts of the machine, that's pretty profound synergy declaration there. 50 years later, what? Go ahead.
No, I'm just clearing my throat.
Okay, good. 50 years later, with much other experience, including the development of large geodesic domes, I found I could build a large spherical environment control for much less expense in the materials and labor that was required to produce the traditional one-story high southern cotton mill. Inside the great column-free space of the clear span geodesic sphere, an octatruss mast structure would support many levels of surrounding outwardly cantilevered octatruss platforms. In the great steamships of yesterday, the engine room was occupied by a very large part of the ship's interior space. This was occupied by large equipment such as 3 decks high engines and boilers. In the place of decks, these engine rooms had opening grading platforms, walkways, and stairways, all open for seeing through and for free circulation of the air. I'll go down and read through to the picture. In 1952, at the University of Raleigh, North Carolina, I was asked to lead a full-term design problem in their department for architecture. I proposed the designing and detailing scale modeling of a large spherical cotton mill within which, and not touching the sphere, would be open frame grading platforms supported by octahedron tetrahedron trusses cantilevered outwardly around the central mast at many levels, with the octatruss platforms occurring only where the machinery was to be situated. In the conventional southern one-story cotton factory, all the machines are on one single floor, requiring the horizontal transfer of the semi-processed cotton products from one machine to the next machine in a manufacturing sequence. In mill terms, this carry across of product was called doffing. In my vertical mill, proposing all doffing was eliminated. In my vertical mill proposal, all doffing was eliminated. The first processing machinery would be situated on a cantilevered open truss at the highest point around the mast inside the dome, and the products would start a continuous downward flow from one machine to the other machine, accomplished exclusively by gravity. No doffing would be required. Here's a picture of his dome, the model of his dome. Those are the cantilever, these little plates that exist in the dome are the cantilevered platforms. And you see a truck down there at the bottom pulling in. Figure 47 is model of an automated cotton mill in Raleigh, North Carolina. Over here, this picture shows the platforms, and there's the octatruss. See the that's a hex truss. So that's interesting because he said tetra and octa. He didn't say hexa, which is interesting to me. But anyway, there are some pictures, and it looks to me like these pictures, any comments or questions here?
Same thing with Old Man River. Did this work? Did they manage to put it up?
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Let me see here. I don't know why I'm so persistent with this stuff. Okay, good. So we can start. Someone start one and reading the next paragraph. Who cares? Who knows they're next?
Okay, I can go.
Okay.
I designed this factory in conjunction with North Carolina State University's top cotton mill professors, as well as with the operating superintendents and other industry experts from neighboring mills. All the cotton mill machinery company sales engineers participated in the project, which was being run for the senior class in architecture of North Carolina State University. North Carolina State University happens to be the leading university in the cotton manufacturing area of the South and has more engineers in that trade than can be found anywhere else. We designed this factory to be completely automated. Inadvertently, it became extraordinarily
Hang on. I think the word is beautiful, but we'll see. Yep, there it is, beautiful.
Okay. It became extraordinarily beautiful. See the figures above. Okay. When the cotton mill owners moved their mills from New England to the Southland, they did not move their own homes. They remained deliberately remote from any labor hassling. When I developed this new mill, which all the professionals considered to be a great improvement, the ownership of the cotton mills was so far away from where the mills are located that the owners heard nothing of our new cotton mill development. The people who managed the mills for the remote owners were economists and statisticians, seeking only to squeeze every cent out of the costs. They had no engineering, design, analytical ability. They sought only to reduce labor costs. Nobody was then considering new cotton manufacturing technology. It was assumed that all possibilities of improving the manufacturing processes had been exhausted long ago. As a consequence, the cotton mill owners paid no attention whatsoever to the mill I designed. The North Carolina State Cotton Manufacturing Engineering scientists who participated in the project agreed that my spherical gravity service mill was optimally efficient and highly desirable. The design exists. We probably will see it adopted one of these days. That is the way with critical path items. They come into use only when Class 1 evolution needs them. In the following year, 1952, at North Carolina State University, I introduced the idea of what I called a mechanical growth house. At that time, I knew how to construct and had already constructed many geodesic domes. Some were enormous spherical environmental controls. As mentioned before, ever larger spheres have ever less space, surface area per unit of enclosed volume. Doubling a dome's diameter increases its surface fourfold, while increasing its volume eightfold. Large domes can be completely transparent, allowing ultraviolet radiation to enter wherever necessary to support the growth of vegetation and the latter's impoundment of sun energy through photosynthesis. Transparent domes can also be opaquely shuttered or mirrored where desired. It is highly feasible to produce two concentric translucent spheres, the outer one being, for instance, 100 meters in diameter, and the inner one being 4 meters less in diameter than the outer one, and having no metal conductors running between their two plastic and fiberglass intertrussed surfaces, and with top and bottom remotely controlled openings in both domes. The southern United States has more of what we think as individual farmers than anywhere else in this country. North Carolina State University, Cornell, and Iowa State University are the leading agricultural engineering sciences schools in America. It was at North Carolina State that, in conjunction with the Growth House, I conducted comparative studies into 1, the economics of individually operated versus business corporation operated farm, and 2, the critical limit size and other conditions of individually owned and personally operated farms versus those same questions for corporation operated farms. I also made comparative studies of farms operated by the very rich as tax write-offs versus the few little subsistence farms, such as those owned by the small tobacco farmers in North Carolina, which are worked entirely by the resident owner farmers. These latter are very personal types of operation in which the farmers carefully watch their crops, even to each tobacco leaf, to get the best out of their investment in the land. These little tobacco farms and certain subsistence farms were quite a different type of eco-technical game than that of the huge conglomerate-owned multi-thousands of acres farm operations. The small individual farmers soon learned all the ways in which the government could help them run their farms. For instance, the US government in the time of the New Deal helped the small farmers by underwriting the cost of construction little local dams on their land, which produce small ponds and lakes that the government stocked with fish. These new energy sources greatly increased the farmers' crop yields and earnings. From that time on, the farms began to hold the water that fell on them. People like myself, who were light plane flyers, began to notice that we flew westward across country that late in the afternoon with the sun in the west, its brilliance began to reflect from the myriads of these little newly dammed farm ponds. Soon the glare of the farm ponds became almost blinding to the airplane pilot. Before the period, the farmland had been a dark carpet at dusk. Overnight, the New Deal had captured all that water for all those farms and had stocked them with highly reproductive fish. I found that North Carolina State University at Raleigh was a great place to discuss the idea of a growth house because the plant physiologists there were some of the best agricultural scientists I could find in America. Do you want to go on or stop or?
Well, Anybody have any comments or questions? Good that it's always good to pause. Any comments or questions? I see Richard's on mute and gone, so unless you want to, we'll continue.
Okay.
Here he comes.
So
Go ahead.
do I continue? Okay. These scientists agreed with me about the desirability of producing a growth house, an enormous clear span sphere with no interior bearing walls or columns. It would have a great central mast around which one above the other would be cantilevered octahedron, tetrahedron arms like branches of a tree extended at successive levels. The horizontally rotatable arms would carry the growing plants with their roots hung in trays. The growth house would be a multi-tiered tray agriculture. Tray agriculture had already been studied a great deal in North Carolina and had been successfully developed. We had some very satisfactory tray growing experiments. We then went on to find that inside the great sphere, we could atomize the water, atomize all the chemical fertilization, and immerse the plants in a sun and nutrient-filled atmosphere that would produce the greatest growth in a given time. The growth-supporting rotatable arm could be separately rotated for cultivation. All the resultant food grown would gradually work downwards by gravity, finally to be packaged or canned automatically and delivered in cases out through the bottom. This growth house is completely designed and ready to be produced. If it were to be used to produce the new winged bean, the life support worth of its product would be enormous. Okay. I have something to say though.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get this to my friend in Indonesia. He's a partner for the chemistry game that we created together, right? Anyway, he owns farms and so on, and he's very, very open to looking at, new ways of doing things because I think one of the things is about doing farming indoors. So if that's a way to do it, because it came up once we were looking at lighting, right? Nowadays you can the lights are created to mimic the sun, and
Right.
so yes, and even from dusk to dawn and things like this. So he was actually very interested in looking at that for an internal farming, like in warehouses and things like that, right? But if there's something like that where you have this growth house where it's efficient, and I'll put it to him because I've shared some of Bucky's ideas with him recently when he was here in KL. He'll be here again in another 3 weeks, perhaps, possibly, yeah. Anyway, I don't know what he'll say. I'll find out and I'll let y'all know. The first thing is, it was really odd hearing me talk like that. You've never heard me speak like that before, It's always for education, yeah. I'll finish off one paragraph, then I'll pass it on.
Okay.
Yeah. Referring back to my designing of the Dymexian house of 1927, that of producing an environment most favorable to a living organism's growth and to its dynamic process, that doing so in the most economically pleasing and safe manner, we found that in designing our North Carolina growth house, we used the same principles for inventorying its essential functions as though we had employed in designing the 1950 and 1956 North Carolina cotton mill and subsequent projects. Considering in some detail how such a most favorable environment can be arrived at, we see that in the first place, we wish to have clear space wherever possible, needing no interior bearing columns or walls. We would interrupt our enclosed space only when we had some service that we needed at that point. There would be no walls or partitions that arbitrarily stopped you from passing through. Space would be broken up only by devices that serve you at preferred locations, for instance, by a bathroom or a clothes storage device. Okay,
Cool.
I'll pause here.
Richard, do you want to read or I'd be glad to read again. I have no trouble reading again. You need to unmute though.
Yeah, I can read for a little bit. I may have to take my leave, but one of our daughters arrived and I may have to break away and talk with her about something that she was
Very
coming
good.
here to get. So anyway, I saw in 1927 that all storage may be divided into two classes, that we rest on shelves held in horizontal display by gravity, and things we hang vertically with gravity, always maintaining the economy of individual display. The horizontal storage we developed in the Dymaxion house is very different from the drawers of a conventional bedroom bureau. I developed what I called O-volving shelves and store walls. The storage walls had two parts, a hemicircular revolving coat closet and a shoe track structured with aluminum tubing. This hemicircular hanger tube revolved around a central axle with an ample amount of room for vertically hanging all clothing, short or long, and with a hemicircular shoe track rigged horizontally below the bottom of hung dresses and coats, etc. The revolving coat closet had also the advantage of coming out into a room so you could pick things out quite neatly instead of having to reach back blindly into a closet. The horizontal O-volving shelves operated like a
Whoops, sorry. The page got excited. There we go.
paternoster, using vertically rotated circular chains similar to a bicycle chain, but more powerful. With geared wheels at top, vertically rotating the bicycle chain supported hanging shelves. The shelves were suspended in such a way that they would never tilt, yet were strong enough to support great weights. On pressing a button, electric motors rotated the two top sprocket wheels, both of which mounted at both ends of the rig. The bicycle-type chain loops were suspended. Each shelf in turn would appear swiftly at a single horizontal opening and in the storage wall, positioned at a height safe from the reach of children. With these shelves, children would never have to be told, don't. I was designing an environment that in every way could accommodate children learning what they have to learn in order to conduct themselves physically and safely without getting into trouble with the operations of the environment. So an adult would never have to don't the children or discourage their curiosity initiated, i.e. experiments, for fear that the child might get hurt.
By the way, I looked up the word paternoster.
Yeah.
In the Roman Catholic Church, the Lord's Prayer, especially in Latin, is the paternoster. Number two, an elevator consisting of a series of linked doorless compartments moving continuously on an endless belt. An elevator consisting of a series of linked doorless compartments moving. That's like in the old buildings. We used to have what the heck did they call that? Where the kitchen would serve downstairs and they'd have
All right.
what was it called? What were those things called?
I'm trying to remember now myself. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
No. And the guy upstairs, the Lord would ring the bell and the person downstairs would put the food in the thing and run it up to the second floor or the third floor, wherever they were. Yeah, a paternoster. Very interesting. I'm complete.
Okay, are they called dumb waiters?
Dumbwaiter. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it's called. Thank you, Anne. What I don't get is why that human being dot is there. There must be two human beings over on the left side. I can see where I don't know. I'm looking at these pictures and I still wasn't able to grok what the heck he was talking about. I think the grading design, I can see it here, right?
Yeah.
This looks like it, but I'm not picturing what he's saying. So, but I'm enjoying the reading nonetheless. I don't get how these closet works. I get how they slide out. I think they slide out so that people can see them. So I don't know. Oh, there's the dumbwaiter idea, right?
Right.
Yeah. That line sketch of the lady there. Okay, cool. Well, there's my complaint. That dot is representing a human being. So there we go. Okay. Do you want to, what's your family situation, Richard? Do you want to continue reading?
Well, maybe I'll let you read. And I'll just take a quick break. I'll go on mute
Okay,
and just see where they are at.
cool. I want you to take care of your family. Very cool. I then decided my O-volving shells would be very logical for use in a library. I designed a proposed library project for Princeton University, which, although not built at the time, would be very practical if used in the future. It had a deep 50-meter in diameter circular silo, well going far below into the ground, with walls that would thoroughly waterproofed on their outside, with walls that were thoroughly waterproofed. Above this deep circular well, I mounted 2 levels of octatruss floors. Above them, a hemispherical geodesic dome 60 meters in diameter. I designed a radial arrangement of many consoles on the library's ground floor, each within a library book category. Inside of instead of taking elevators to the right floor and walking to the shelves, the O-volving shelves would bring the 1 meter long shelves of books to you vertically before your eyes, fast or slowly, until the right shelf arrives at and you locate your book. I think I'm picturing that. That's kind of what this picture is right here.
Right.
These O shelves. Good. Thanks for confirming. All the vertical bookshelves O-volving was activated by an electric push button and high-speed motor. It could be run by you at a speed suitable for your adequate inspection of the contiguous titles. Any book seeker who wants to can dial for the book by computer entered title or description and will O-volve to the seeker's window at high speed. That's what they're doing at Amazon delivery right now.
Wow.
And they're using robots. So that's interesting. When the book arrives at the console, it's practical to have it pneumatically and mechanically open behind the console window for the reader's immediate viewing. The reader cannot put hands on it, possibly to damage it. By push button, the viewer at the console can also order a Xerox copy of any or all of the book's pages. Also, by push buttons, the viewer can order a copy of the book for purchase. At the exit door of the library, the Xerox pages or purchased book will be waiting for credit card purchase. In the Princeton University design, there were 2 decks of consoles. One was the book untouching general library visitor. The other, 20 feet from the ground level entrance, would be accessible only to research accredited visitors who could remove the books from the shelves and open them after they O-volved into place. The O-volving consoles on both decks would be triangularly arrayed all around the library's circular decks in a pattern of as close to one another packing as possible without making the viewer feel crowded. The many perpendicularly book-loaded O-volving shelves would be parallelly suspended within the vast and deep underground air-conditioned silos. In terms of overall initial and operating costs compared to those of the multi-level searching walk-around fixed steel book stacks library, my design solution costs are extremely favorable. The O-volving shelf technology was perfected operationally to everyone's satisfaction at Beech Aircraft 35 years ago. The principle is now completely sound, only awaiting application. Any comments or questions on that? You know, what I'm thinking of is that I have one kitchen cabinet where the door is kind of louvered and the door is like this, and you open it up like this, and there's a big round turntable underneath there, and you just spin the turntable until you can access the part that you want. And as a result, that entire square, 2 foot square or 3 foot square area, you can actually store things in there that you otherwise couldn't store because it's just too far to reach back in deeply. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking. In the early 1960s, I was commissioned by a Japanese patron to design one of my tetrahedral floating cities for Tokyo Bay. Now, this is the good part. What time is it? But I think now we're going to have several things going on. It's 10:20. We got a little while. Floating cities for Tokyo. This blows my mind. I've looked at the pictures and I don't understand it. 3/4 of our planet Earth is covered with water, most of which may float organic cities. Floating cities pay no rent to landlords. They are situated on the water, which they desalinate and recirculate in many useful and non-polluting ways. They are ships with all an ocean's ships technology autonomy, but they are also ships that will always be anchored. They don't have to go anywhere. Their shape and its human life accommodations are not compromised, as must be the shape of the living quarters of ships whose hull shapes are constructed so they can slip fish-like at high speed through water and high seas with maximum economy. Floating cities are designed with the most buoyantly stable conformation of deep sea bellbuoys. Their omni-surface terraced slope-faced tetrahedral structuring is employed to avoid the lethal threat of precipitous falls by humans from vertically sheer high-rising buildings. So a tall building can collapse on people where this floating tetra ball wouldn't collapse like that, I suppose, is what he's saying. The tetrahedron has the most surface with the least volume of all polyhedra. As such, it provides the most possible outside living. Its sloping external surface is adequate for all its occupants to enjoy their own private outside tiered terracing garden homes. They are most economically serviced from the common omni-nearest possible center of volume of all polyhedra.
My God, I can actually visualize this, you know.
Huh.
And it's true, the tiered terracing garden homes. Because it is like the pyramid, except they're stepped pyramids. Yeah. And so the steps sticking out as you go further down, they are the terrace gardens. So literally every home can have a terrace garden. You can have literally many different size homes, and maybe the lower you go, the homes can be bigger. I don't know, but the upper, they can be the same, but also like the division, how you divide the thing inside. You can just provide more space if you want same size homes. You know, very interesting.
It's kind of like in the Old River Home project, because everything was circular, the angles, and as you get up higher, you just make the rooms wider, and as you get down lower, you make the rooms narrower, and everybody gets square footage, I suppose.
Yeah, and the only thing with circular buildings is that building furniture and the things, because you have that curve, so it's a bit harder to fit rather than this tetrahedral one where you have walls that are kind of flat, yes, and straight. Anyway, I like both. I like both ideas.
Yeah, there's a dome house that was built down in Provo, and I've been in it. I knew the guy who owned the house and lived in the house. And yeah, the exterior walls are curved, but the way the rooms were designed, everything else was, there were a few
Oh,
wide angle walls, but most of them were straight and many of them were 90 degrees, so they were quite normal inside. Just
oh,
the exterior ones uh opened up wider and had a curved exterior wall, but they were windows, and it was actually quite neat to live in it.
wow. Do you have photos of them, of that house?
No, I might be able to find some. Let me make a note about the Dome House in Orem. I actually just talked on Friday. I was reminded as I visited a friend, he was business partners with that guy, and I worked with them for a while. Dome House, Rick. I'll put that down and I'll talk to Rick and see if he has pictures. I think I used to have pictures, and there might be some because it's so unique. There might be some on Facebook or on the internet someplace.
Yeah, I'm checking now actually.
Okay.
Um, any particular, okay, Florida. Let's try Florida.
This is Dome House, Orem, Utah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've got some BYU Triple Dome House entered in the Utah Valley Parade of Homes. Maybe I'll check that out and see if there's something worth showing next time.
Sure.
Dome House for sale in Orem. I'll have to check it out because that doesn't seem to be taking me anyplace. All the mechanical organics of a floating city are situated low in its hull for maximum stability. All the shopping centers and other communal service facilities are inside the structure. Tennis courts and other athletic facilities are on the top deck. When suitable, the floating cities are equipped with alongside or interiorly lagooned marinas for the safe mooring of sail and powerboats for the floating city occupants. When moored in protected waters, the floating cities may be connected by land bridgeways. In 1966, my Japanese patron died, and the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development commissioned me to carry out full design and economic analysis of the floating tetrahedral city by for potential USA use. With the with my associates, I completed the design and study as well as a scaled down model. The study showed that the fabricating and operating costs were such that a floating city could sustain high standard of living, yet be economically occupiable as a rental so low as to be just above that rated as poverty level by HUD authorities. You know, this dawns on me that because of the climate change, some of these coastal cities, they're worried about being able to maintain their beaches and their housing
Yeah,
on the beach. There's a solution right there.
yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, The Secretary of HUD sent the drawings, engineering studies, and economic analysis to the Secretary of the Navy, who ordered the Navy's Bureau of Ships to analyze the project for its waterworthiness, stability, and organic capability. The Bureau of Ships verified all our calculations and found the design to be practical and waterworthy. The Secretary of the Navy then sent the project to the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, which is which its where its fabrication and assembly procedures and costs were analyzed on the basis of the floating city being built in shipyard as in aircraft carriers and other vessels, as are aircraft carrier. Yeah, so it was going to be built in a shipyard. The cost analysis of the new Navy department came out within 10% of our cost, which bore out its occupiability at rental just above poverty class. At
Hmm.
this point, the city of Baltimore, which by the way is now in the news because that one ship bashed into the bridge and brought the
Yes.
Baltimore harbor to a screeching halt. If
Yes.
let me see, what did they call that bridge? It was uh, I don't know, I was going to call it James Madison. Um, it was about the Star Spangled Banner, whoever that was. At this point, the city of Baltimore became interested in acquiring the first such floating city for anchorage just offshore in Chesapeake Bay, adjacent to Baltimore's waterfront. At this time, President Lyndon Johnson's Democratic Party went out of power. President Johnson took the model with him and installed it in his LBJ Texas library. The city of Baltimore's politicians went out of favor with the Nixon administration, and the whole project languished. The city of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and other cities of the US are interested in the possibility of acquiring such floating cities. Chances are of one being inaugurated are now improving. In relation to other floating cities, here's their floating city.
Hmm.
And it's a tetrahedron.
Yeah,
So
it looks amazing, actually.
Yeah. In relation to such floating cities, it is to be noted that they are completely designed under one authority, and when they become obsolete, they are scrapped and melted, and the materials go into subsequent production of a greatly advanced model, which improvements are based on early experiences as well as the general interim advances in all technology. There are three types of floating cities. There is one for protected harbor waters, one for semi-protected waters, and one for unprotected deep sea installations. The deep sea type is supported by marine pontoons positioned under the turbulence with their centers of buoyancy 100 feet below the ocean surface. Structural columns rise from submarine pontoons outwardly through the water to support the floating city high above the crest of the greatest waves, which thus pass innocuously below the city's lowest flooring. As rivers flow under great bridges, the deep sea, deeply pontooned floating cities will be as motionless in respect to our planet as our islanded or land-based cities. There are also deep sea spherical and cylindrical geodesic floating cities with whose hulls are positioned entirely below the ocean surface turbulence. Only their vertical entrance towers penetrate outwardly through the disturbed surface waters. The occupants of submarine cities, with their vertical towers penetrating outwardly above water, can be serviced by helicopters landing on tower top platforms. Such pontooned or hulled submarine cities also can provide safe mid-ocean docking for atomic-powered cargo and passenger-carrying submarine transports. With their submarine hulls locked together below the turbulence, a safe passageway can be opened between them. Richard's not back, so I'm sure he's engaged. Our time is 10:33. We've got a little time. Even in mild weather, docking even in mild weather, docking cannot be done on the open water surface of an ocean. Even the mildest old ocean or ground swells would roll any two ocean ships' great tonnages into disastrous hull-smashing classes. Relative mass attraction is proportional to the product of the masses and the inter-attracted. I'm sure that was hyphenated off of and does not need to be hyphenated, although it probably should be hyphenated here if it were going to be in English. Inter-attracted pair multiplied by the second power of the relative proximity changes. Wow, there's a scientific explanation. When any ocean-going steel vessels come within critical proximity, their interaction increases as the second power of their relative distance. That's interesting to know. In fact, that kind of sounds like the inverse square theory, Einstein's inverse square theory of gravity and of radiation. Page are we on? Page 336. We're on page 336. Wow, we've been hauling buns here. Okay, we're above that. I'm just going to put a little marker here and I'll come back to it. So I want to find where that is. Okay. Their interaction is fourfolded every time the distance between them is halved. The chain attraction increasing force pulls them sideways toward one another, ultimately to touch and chew up one another's skins. That is, unless one is maneuvered in a time backward or forward away from the other. Land harbors are essential for safe docking or inter-tie-up of ships of any size. There are relatively few big ship harbors in the world. This fact and the world-around scarcity of such good harbors as Athens, Piraeus, France's Cherbourg, I don't know, Italy's Venice, and USA's New York or Tokyo's Yokohama, have greatly affected the geographical patterning of world history. The new ability to transfer cargoes at sea would completely alter the world economic balances and could bring ships once more into economic competition with airplanes. The recent decades development of 70-knot submerged speed of the great atomic submarines complemented by floating cities could herald the beginning of a new era of subsurface oceanic traffic. Wow. In due time, small cruising yachts will be able to sail or power around the world in safe one-day runs from one protected floating harbor to the next. Okay, that's page 336 right there. And there's the 3 dots.
Yep.
So yeah, that was even a mild weather docking cannot be done. And 2 ocean-going vessels. Yeah, here it is. I'm going to check that out. Okay. Do you want to read for a while?
Sure. In 1958, I saw clearly the progression of technical events altering in all old engineering concepts regarding the relative increase in the overall weights of structures, and designed my sky-floating tensegrity structures, which I call Cloud 9s. A 100-foot diameter tensegrity trussed geodesic sphere weighing 3 tons encloses 7 tons of air. The air to structural weight ratio is 2:1. When we double the size so that the geodesic sphere is 200 feet in diameter, the weight of the structure increases to 7 tons, while the weight of the air increases to 56 tons. The air to structure ratio changes as 8:1. When we double the size again to a 400-foot geodesic sphere, the size of several geodesic domes now operating, the weight of the air inside increases to about 500 tons, while the weight of the structure increases to 15 tons. Wow. The air weight to structure weight ratio is now 33:1. When we get to a geodesic sphere 1/2 mile in the diameter, the weight of the structure itself becomes of relatively negligible magnitude, for the ratio is approximately 1,000:1. When the sun shines on an open frame aluminum geodesic sphere of 1/2 mile diameter, the sun penetrating through the frame and reflected from the aluminum members of the concave far side bounces back into the sphere and gradually heats the interior atmosphere to a mild degree. When the interior temperature of the sphere rises only 1 degree Fahrenheit, the weight of the air pushed out of the sphere is greater than the weight of the spherical frame geodesic structure. Okay, this means that the total weight of the interior air plus the weight of the structure is much less than the surrounding atmosphere. This means that the total assemblage of the geodesic sphere and its contained air will have to float outwardly into the sky, being displaced by the heavy atmosphere around it. When a great bank, yeah, do you want to pause there first?
Well, I mean, he's saying they become balloons
Yeah.
because the air inside the dome is lighter than the air outside the dome, so they want to float. I think that's what he said.
Yeah, the picture shows something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
When a great bank of mist lies in a valley in the morning, the sun shines upon it. The sun heats the air inside the bank of mist. The heated air expands and therefore pushes some of itself outside the mist bank. The total assembly of the mist bank weighs less than the atmosphere surrounding it, and the mist bank floats aloft into the sky. Thus are clouds manufactured. As geodesic spheres get larger than 1/2 mile in diameter, they become floatable cloud structures. If their surfaces were draped with outwardly hung polyethylene curtains to retard the rate at which air would come back in at night, the sphere and its internal atmosphere would continue to be so light as to remain aloft. Such sky-floating geodesic tensegrity spheres may be designed to float at preferred altitudes of thousands of feet. The weight of human beings added to such prefabricated cloud nines would be relatively negligible. Many thousands of passengers could be housed aboard 1 mile diameter and larger cloud structures. The passengers could come and go from cloud to cloud or cloud to ground as the clouds float around the earth or are anchored to mountain tops.
Geez,
While the building,
I have trouble believing what I'm hearing. I mean, this is so freaking. I think I'm reading a science fiction novel here.
Yeah.
yes,
I mean, this is so amazing. The bigger the dome gets, the ratio between the weight of the air inside the dome and the weight of the air outside the dome increases geometrically to the point where the dome over 100 feet off the ground would have a buoyancy. Wow, this is boggling my freaking mind.
Yep.
Oh wow. Such sky-floating geodesic tensegrity spheres, to read what you read, may be designed to float at preferred altitudes of thousands of feet. The weight of the human beings would be negligible. That boggles my freaking mind.
Yes.
Okay.
Certainly puts a whole new light on commuter traveling. Yeah. Just think I could be floating over KL and fly into Calgary to work for the day and then go back to hanging out on the Malaysians sort of landscape. Yeah.
I think we're getting back to Queen, and it depends on which way the wind blows as to whether you get back or not. Okay, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
They could be anchored to mountaintops.
Yeah.
Actually, the only issue I can think of is that the transporting people on and off it, and getting from. I mean, yeah, you can lower the cloud, these bubbles, right? Yeah, but unless they can tether anywhere on Earth, and they're tethering ports or something like that. That'd be quite cool. Okay, I'll finish that paragraph.
Yeah, go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
Okay, while the building of such floating clouds is some years in the future, we may foresee that with the floating tetrahedronal cities, air-deliverable skyscrapers, submarine islands, sub-dry surface dwellings, domed over cities, flyable dwelling machines, and rentable autonomous living, black boxes, man may be able to converge and deploy around Earth without its depletion.
Cool. And that's a good place to pause. That leaves, we'll start with Frank Lloyd Wright, and that leaves us probably just enough pages to finish next week. And I'll make a note to start here. And let's, if everybody's okay, we'll wind it up. Is everybody in consensus with that?
Yep, sure.
Good. This is a 5-4 or 4. Yeah, it'll be May. We're going into May, folks.
Yeah, wow.
Okay, good. I'll finish that later. And here we are. So Anne, how are you feeling and what are your takeaways tonight?
You're right. It's like reading science fiction, but that's what it is when you talk about like I read this Dr. Michio Kaku's book as well, Physics of the Future, and that sounds very futuristic as well. The other one I've read is actually Arthur C. Clarke's book that was written in 1962. He talked about space. He talked about getting men on the moon, which happened in 1969. He wrote about it in 1962. Then he also wrote about the fact that the future of vehicular, like how the what looks like of the future, right? He says that technology is already here, and but it's just a matter of somebody making it economical to produce and to run. An example he gave, one of the examples, of course, was the hovercraft, right? A hovercraft. So a vehicle that can go on land and at sea, right? And you don't need to build roads. Roads and the infrastructure for that costs a lot of money, right? And you can literally hover over grass, so you don't heat up the city with concrete. What do you call tarred surfaces, right? Which is very, very hot. So he said that's one. The other one is using magnets, right? Going on to, I think, was it Elon Musk? There is something that they're building in California called the Hyperloop.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how far they went with it. It was like a distance, like traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Singapore is supposed to take like 15 minutes kind of distance, So anyway, I'm not sure how far Hyperloop went, and it was supposed to be based on this technology of running the trains on magnetic tracks. Yeah, it should be no friction. There's no friction because it's not sitting on anything. It's not rolling on anything. It's floating. That's why it can go at that speed. So anyway, yeah, so yes, you're right about it's like reading. And he wrote it he talked about it in 1950 something. He's 70 years ahead of his time.
He wrote, I think that book was in 82 or something.
Yeah, but some of his ideas came up before that,
Oh yeah, yeah.
So on, crazy. Yeah, so I'm done with that. So most fascinating morning. So Richard, how do you feel and what is your takeaway today?
Well, now that we're kind of in the futuristic mode and science fiction, it brings me back having talked about students in the first place. But I had a student that wrote a futuristic paper in 1987, 1988, and we got quite attached to it. And so the next term, I took all of the entire class and said, basically, it was like, we're going to do what Bucky Fuller did. It was that he was, as he did, he went, 40 hours or something, talking about everything he knew about whatever. And so we kind of built it off that framework. And I said, let's take everything we all know about social work and dump it into this paper. And it was written, as a futuristic document that would be delivered in 2026 at the 100th anniversary of the National Association of Social Work in Canada. So here we are, only 2 years out, and it's really quite something to read it. And it was all based on the fact that the profession would adopt Fuller's way of thinking by the end of the century. So it was from 89 to 99, sort of roughly 10 years. And then from the turn of the century till 26, a sort of quarter of a century, all these changes would happen. And you know, one of them was we're going to get rid of acid rain and we're going to get rid of lots of things. But we didn't predict some of the things that were going to replace it are just as bad or worse. And so anyway, I'm getting close to being able to be available to read that paper.
Wow. Wonderful.
It's kind of a fun read, actually.
Very cool.
Yeah. So anyway, that's great. I'm sorry for the absence there for a few minutes, but
Okay.
over to you, Steve. And
Thank you. Well, I'm just delighted. You know, everything I said at the beginning tonight, I'm gonna go ditto. The floating cities blew me away. The idea that there's a ratio. He talked about two ratios that caught my attention. One was as seagoing ships get closer and closer together, there's some kind of relationship of the mass of the ships as they come closer together. They're more attracted to each other at a certain ratio. I'm going to go back and look at that. And the other one that he brought up was this idea that as this dome gets bigger, there's a relationship in the weight of the atmosphere inside the dome as opposed to the atmosphere outside the dome. I'm going to go back and read that too. It sounds to me like the inverse square law, Einstein's inverse square law about gravity, and or maybe it was Newton's inverse square law about gravity and how it works. How gravity, as it gets further out, reduces its pull, not just arithmetically, but actually on a square ratio, depending on what's going. So I'm going to take a look at those formulas. That sounds pretty exciting to me. And I probably have dreams about floating cities. That's the wildest dadgum thing I could ever imagine. Okay, next week we will be finishing the book, most likely, and then we can maybe start on the chronophile. I think that would be a great idea. I was wondering if everybody would be bored if we went down through and went through this year and this event and that year and next event chronologically. But I really do think it's great insight, Richard, that we think, well, where was my family at that time? Was I even born yet? What was my grandfather doing at that time? You know, what am I doing now? I think that would be cool to go through that chronophile and just kind of reacquaint to the sequence and maybe notice the arithmetic versus exponential increase in how screwed up we are on the planet. Okay.
yeah, it was interesting too, because you can tie it to some of it to international or national events.
Yeah.
Like one of mine, when I looked at it, partly because I grew up as a kid with crystal earphones listening to the World Series every fall. And of
Yeah.
course, and I was a dyed-in-the-wool Brooklyn Dodger fan. And how I hated those Yankees who kept beating them every year. But
Wow.
but when I went back and looked at it, when I entered grade 1, that was the year that Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in terms of being accepted as a baseball player.
Yeah,
So
cool.
so those little things like that you can get matched up with your own chronophile.
See, my grandkids have no idea of a crystal radio.
Yeah.
And the significance of being able to take this crystal, touch a wire on it just at the right place, and be able to hear the World Series. I
Yeah.
mean, now all that is all streamed, right? You stream it on your phone. You don't worry about a crystal and pick up something floating through the air that happens to be the World Series. I
Yeah.
mean, that will never happen again, I don't think. Wow, that's amazing. Well, I sure appreciate all of you. I'm complete. Everybody complete?
Yeah,
All
Yeah.
right, very good. See y'all
Take
next
care.
week. Bye-bye.
I'm looking at crystal radio.
Have you even heard about crystal radios?
No, no, not
Yeah,
at all.
They were amazing. When I was a kid, it was a big thing. You get a crystal and you pick up the local radio station, depending on the electromagnetic waves going through the air. It's amazing.
Yeah, it could have caused the
That-
same problem that iPhones cause now in the classroom.
That's right.
Some kid with a crystal in his ear, listening to the World Series and making it look like you were listening to the arithmetic teacher talking to you.
Right. It never arrived here. We've never seen this.
Wow. Tell me
Okay.
what, let's check in next week and see what insights the crystal radio has for you, Anne.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye now.
everybody. See you.